As we celebrate Black History Month, I'm reminded of a recent episode of one of my favorite podcasts, the American Story Podcast. It's a great podcast, 6 or 8 minute podcast about American history. And episode 132 talks about the signing by President Abraham Lincoln of the Emancipation Proclamation on New Year's Day in 1863. And from our perspective in history, we look back to that now and we just know the big picture, and that was the beginning. It was part of the Civil War. But this podcast shows some of the history and what was going on at that time. So let's talk about that. So first of all, Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election. This was a bold move on his part. It was not a popular move in many circles. So his re-election was uncertain. And if you know anything about politicians, they tend to move away from things that are uncertain. And yet he decided that he would sign this, freeing the slaves in the Confederacy. It was opposed by Democrats. The Democrat governor of New York publicly and vehemently opposed this effort. Even Republicans opposed this because they said it was not part of the reason they went to war. And then finally, he was concerned about not just the political fallout. He was concerned about the legal fallout. He was fairly certain that he would be sued over this, and this issue would go before the courts. And the U.S. Supreme Court at that time was the same U.S. Supreme Court, or mostly the same court, that had issued the Dred Scott decision, in which they said black people were not humans and therefore not eligible for protection under the U.S. Constitution. So all of these things made for uncertainty. He was also concerned about trying to pass a constitutional amendment to enshrine this. That was not at all certain at the same time as well. So it was a bold move on his part. He did sign that. It was celebrated. We look back on that today as a step in helping America attain the high ideals that we talk about in the American Declaration of Independence. And as I think about that and listen to that podcast, I couldn't help but think about another step when the U.S. Congress passed the American Civil Rights legislation in the 1960s to do away with these Jim Crow laws across the country. And that was another step. Many of us don't realize that some of our situations in Texas, like the University Interscholastic League, did not become integrated as a result of the civil rights legislation in the 1960s to the early 1970s. It wasn't that long ago that Texas was forced to integrate and adopt these high ideals from the Declaration of Independence because of that civil rights legislation. And then more recently, in 2020, we saw an explosion of homeschooling, and the demographic group that saw the largest increase in terms of homeschooling was black families. And many of those black families say they're doing that because they want to teach their children the history of the black community. So this is a great story. It's a great thing for us to celebrate as we celebrate Black History Month. And I celebrate my black friends who are homeschooling. I hope you'll pass this information along, to share this video, and click on the links below for more information and other resources. And thank you for helping us keep Texas families free.